Good morning. Greetings. Welcome to the Dr. Obitashaka show. I hope you've enjoyed the last two shows. One that I did was a taping of a speech that I did in 2009 on Brother Malcolm X, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. So I hope that you got something out of that. And the one before that was The Way of the Spirit. And that one was kind of a summary of a lot of the work I've done. That was done also around, the end of the 90s, around 1999. So I hope you got something out of that. Today, the topic for today's show is one that I've been preparing you for quite a while. And for those who have purchased the book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, I cover it, the topic that I'm going to cover today in the book, but I'm bringing out new information. And to Carnita Groves, who's watching from Ghana, Hotep. We're developing a listening audience that's global. Africa, Ghana and Nigeria, especially the Gambia. And we've got serious viewers in Jamaica and right on to the Caribbean and brothers and sisters from Jamaica, France, the United Kingdom. We've had some viewers from India. And of course, soul brothers and sisters and a lot of others from the United States. So I hope that the two shows that you saw for the last 2 weeks are enlightening. The one on Malcolm covered some stuff that people aren't generally aware of. I didn't rehash my book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. I went into some new material. This is the book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X, that Dr. Asa Hilliard said dwarfs all writings on Malcolm and was rated #1 in the New York Times by Michael Eric Dyson. That book's out of print right now. So I hope that you got something out of that, because May 19th was Brother Malcolm X, or El Hajj Malik El Shabazz's birthday. And he's one of the baddest brothers that walked the planet. And The Way of the Spirit was an interview done by Reverend Brown, who was a minister in the House of the Lord Church. And he was a member of the National Black United Front. I was a co-founder of the National Black United Front and national vice chair for a good 25 years. He and I went to Cuba twice, negotiated agreements with the Cuban government for Blacks in the US, including free medical scholarships. So he interviewed me in my home. That was upstairs, as opposed to this, which is in my study. And it was kind of a survey of where I was going. I told him I didn't want to cover the Europeans, but he brought them in anyway. So you got a little introduction to what my next book that I'm finishing now, I'm almost at 600 pages, on Seba, which is dealing with the way in which we transmit our culture. And by the way, for those who still are in the mud arguing we don't have a culture, all people do. But any people that can demonstrate that their method for replicating their culture, that is for passing the culture on, which in technical terms is called pedagogy, method of instruction. But in ancient Kemet, it was called Seba, which meant bringing the student to the light, which literally meant bringing out the light that resides within each person out. And I'm a revolutionary, so my thoughts are form into systems. And so this one is a replacement system for the miseducation system of the West. It's going beyond Carter G. Woodson stuff, which was breakthrough, where he's talking about for taught their history, philosophy, politics, economics, and social theory. Our minds have been put on control, on automatic pilot. We'll do what the master wants you to do without being told to do so. But I'm taking a step beyond that, and I'm dealing with the system of thought and showing that even when you have African information, if it's transmitted in the Eurocentric way, you'll end up in the same place, despiritualized. You'll end up with a regurgitation system of facts, and it will be stripped of spirit and of creativity. So the way of the spirit is kind of touching on some of the things that I'll be getting into, that you'll see when we get into this book. Should be out by the end of this year. So the topic for today is the trois, mothers of humanity, and the creators of African and world civilization. And anyone that knows me knows that the trois are like central to my heart and central to my direction as a scholar. And a lot of my interest in the trois has been shaped by the visit of what I've described when we went through the God Within series, my experience with the beautiful light and the beautiful light of God that gave me the key to just societies that we'll go into today, that comes from the trois. And so it really alerted me to just how central the trois are to African history, world history, African culture and civilization, and world culture and civilization. And my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, is a follow-up on the mother principle, diving more deeply into the trois. What I'll cover today will have some stuff that's not in the integration trap, but it'll also be guided by its general perimeters. So I'm a believer that we are our past, we are everything that we've ever been. And when we're conscious of the best parts of it, we can go forward and be the best that we can possibly be. But before getting into the topic for today, I want to speak to an issue that has been very important in the world, and that's dealing with the Palestinian people. And I want to extend the show's support, my own personal support, to the Palestinian people who are colonized in the West Bank and Gaza by Israel. The Palestinians face an oppressive situation that, while it's been equated to South Africa and shares some similarities to South Africa, particularly to apartheid, it shares even greater similarities to the condition of Blacks in the United States, and I might also say Native Americans. The Palestinians are oppressed by a settler colonial state, and Blacks are oppressed in the United States by a settler colonial state that has become successful because it genocided its occupants, 90% of them. Now they're coming back, but 90% of the Native Americans were genocided. And so in both cases, we're living under a system that's based on settler colonialism. Native Americans are directly oppressed under a settler colonial system. I define the system we're oppressed under as semi-colonial. That is, it has aspects of colonialism, but it's something else, but it has that as one of its aspects. And one of the aspects that's similar between the Palestinians and Blacks in the United States is that the Israelis occupy the area in which the Palestinians have largely been pushed into the Gaza and the West Bank. So they're an occupying force, just as the police serve as an occupying army in Black communities. And when things really break out, then the National Guard and the military. And as we showed in the film or the interview between me and Minu Ampin on the assassination of Martin Luther King, that assassination was government executed. And even though it appears the mafia was given the assignment of the shoot, it was the government authorizing it with military as backup. And every day the Palestinians are randomly shot by the police, as we are in Black communities in the United States. And both the Palestinians and Blacks here are confined to what are called ghettos. And it should be interesting for the Jewish people to know that the system that genocided them, that is the system of Nazism promulgated by Adolf Hitler, was a system inspired by Nietzsche, not because he was anti-Semitic, that it may not be the case, but because his idea of arbitrary power, his idea of the strong man who has no morals, who exercises what he called will to power. That was the basis for a lot of Hitler's dehumanized concepts along with anti-Semitism. But Hitler based his system of Nazism on the United States. And it is a shame that a people who were genocided to 6 million in numbers, along with gypsies and others, would use some of these methods that was used on them. It's a shame. Yes, they have not put Palestinians in concentration camps, but they have restricted them to diets of 1,400 calories a day. Now, I'm on that diet, but that's a health diet if you have the right nutrition. That is, green and yellow vegetables, no more meat than this. It will prolong your life. But the Palestinians are not getting a balanced diet. And everybody can't live on that 14-calorie diet if they're athletes or if they're doing heavy construction work or something like that. But they are being restricted to a starvation diet. And many Blacks, brown, and poor people in this country go to bed every night hungry. So the situation is similar. The current outbreak that's just reached an accord where there's a ceasefire just recently between Hamas and the Israeli government. The triggers for it was the Israeli police attack on the Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam. And it was triggered by the eviction of Palestinian families from their homes in East Jerusalem. I watched Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman, who is a Jewish American and very conscious. It's one of the best shows on TV because she's on literally YouTube and on radio, FM, KPFA program. And she has interviewed Palestinians who are living in Jerusalem, one of whom's home has been partially occupied by a Jewish American now living there. And he's occupied part of their house. And he can get away with it because he knows sooner or later the Israeli government will probably come in and take the whole house, and he's probably staking his claim. So, you know, you see people being moved out. And by the way, redevelopment has served a similar role, and gentrification in this country in a more sophisticated way. So these attacks have been combined with a harsh occupation carried out by the Israeli military, which is armed by the United States. But the uprising has been inspired in part also by the awakened Palestinian youth who are tired of this. Now you might say, well, why are we supporting the Palestinians? Well, for a lot of reasons. One, if you're for freedom, you should support the drive for freedom wherever it's occurring in the world, first with your own people and everybody else. And that's been the nature of our culture. But specifically, why support the Palestinian people? Because of the oppression they face. And we should be concerned about that. But also on August the 10th, 2014 in Ferguson, a massive Black movement was launched after Blacks in Ferguson held on for months, responding to the murder of Michael Brown, who had been left to lay in the streets for who knows how long after being murdered by the police. And this triggered the national movement that we now call Black Lives Matter, that is much more than one organization. You should not ignore the fact that the Palestinians were among the first people to condemn the police violence against Blacks in Ferguson and to extend their support to Blacks fighting it. That's one reason. So we extend our support once more to the Palestinian sisters and brothers and demand an end to the US support for Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, as well as the end of the occupation of Black communities. And of course, I support the demand for defund the police. What we need to do is end the police. Just as we end the prisons, you know, we didn't have police in African societies. You did have secret societies that kept checked on the government more than anything. They weren't policing the people so much. Kings had a little fear of them because if they did wrong, these secret societies would grab them at night. That's something that you should have in this country, maybe. Some way to hold accountable the powerful, because they were always the kings in Africa before the coming of slavery and colonialism, subject to the will of the people. And of course, we didn't have prisons in ancient Africa. And we need to get to a point where prisons are eliminated in this country and around the world. So my topic for today's show is the trois, the mothers and fathers of humanity, and the creators of African and world civilizations. From the beginning of this show, which has been going on now for approximately 5 months, we've had a multidimensional approach to the show. That is, we've focused on political issues, particularly at the time in which Trump was running for re-election, the need to vote him out of the White House into the jailhouse. And we focused on the victory and how Blacks played the leading role in that. We are focused on spiritual issues, 5 shows on God within, because that is really the greatest force, the greatest power that all people have, and it is the central basis for African and African American, African Caribbean, global African cultures. But the Spirit of God is within everyone. And so we are focused on this and also linked it to how the Spirit links up to resistance movements. This show is also focused on other issues, including reparations and families, and looked at the state of Black communities. So this show is grounded in the understanding that the African and African American historical and cultural past cannot be separated from the conditions of Blacks in the US and Blacks and Africans around the world today. And so my approach to history, and I'm a historian, philosopher, political scientist, an organizer, and a spirit man. My approach is to make the past serve the present. And so a lot of my approach to history is to deal with current conditions and then look at how does the past play in that? How does it play in terms of explaining these current conditions? How does it play in terms of changing them? And I don't believe all the answers are in the past. I'm a revolutionary. And so I believe you got to put some change in your formula, put some pep in your step. You know, I'm a strategist before anything, and I'll never announce how I'm going to take an opponent out. And sometimes we'll never tell them how they were taken out, because if you run a perfect strategy on your enemy, they won't even know how it happened. And so I'm not going to be telegraphing my punches, but history is certainly a guideline for an understanding of your strengths, and your strategy comes from that, and an understanding of your culture. And this show has placed a special emphasis on the role of African, or what I call new African culture, African American or new African culture, something that we generally neglect, dispel, think that we don't have. And so as we explore the trois, mothers and fathers of humanity, and the creators of African and world civilization, we're doing that in part so that we can strengthen this culture that we have, but also better understand it, because at its foundation, it's African. In past shows, I've analyzed the condition of African American and global African communities. African American communities in the United States, and then global African communities in the Caribbean, in Europe, in South America. And though I haven't discussed it, included in it is Asia. And again, you've heard me refer to this before, but I haven't gone into depth into this yet. I've covered it, and it's in the integration trap. Again, this topic comes from, again, piping into God's mind, the beautiful light that explains why are Black families and Black communities and the African world in some conditions that are worse than at the beginning of independence in Africa, and worse than any point in our history, in some ways worse than slavery, in some ways. What is it that happened? And I've explained before, I didn't have an answer for this. When one of my students asked me this question, I saw the beautiful light. Telepathically, God told me, anytime you hear these words, it doesn't come from me, it came through me. And everyone that has studied this and used this, scholars, organizers, everybody else says, this is it, because I'm not smart enough to get this one. God gave it to me. That what's hit Black communities, and what's since 1968, the African world largely since the 1980s, the Caribbean since the 70s, particularly islands like Jamaica, is that powerful hostile forces hit us in the US. I've mentioned this before, and I'm giving this as background because I want you to understand how we use the past to heal some of these breaks. That's the whole point. And if you don't understand the cause of a problem, you're not going to come up with the correct solution. If you've got an illness and go to a doctor, you want a diagnosis that's accurate. And this is the best diagnosis out there because it comes from God through me. The forces that hit us since '68 have created changes we didn't see in Black communities in the US before. It's affected Europe, especially the UK, the United Kingdom, but not as seriously as here, because they have social programs to buffer the hurt that brings in the problems. So these hostile forces were deindustrialization, taking jobs out of Black communities, And because Blacks were heavily concentrated in industrial work due to World War II and after, we made up 20% of the workforce. Therefore, when Blacks lost good paying industrial jobs, they did not have a means after that to support their families, because left then were service jobs, McDonald's, Burger King's, 7, 8, 9, 10 or less dollars an hour. And so you had the breakup of Black families. And then the system of the United States made a decision that they did not want another resistance movement. They placed drugs in Black communities. They assassinated Black leadership. As I pointed out, I faced 3, denied me a teaching credential that I could have beat them on, but decided not to fight on it. The Spirit told me not to. I didn't know why, but I followed it. And tried to deny me tenure at San Francisco State. But I'm one of many, but all of us didn't get wiped out. You know what I mean? But there was a serious effort to knock out conscious Black and African leadership. When I use the term, I'm referring to both. And we know that in Africa, you had the overthrow of some very good governments like the government of Kwame Nkrumah, and the assassination of Africa's greatest leader, who you see always in the background with the sunglasses on, Amilcar Cabral, the world's greatest leader, period. Not Africa's greatest, the world's greatest. So these forces, along with the corporatized system brought on by the United States called globalization, these created a circumstance that not only weakened families, weakened extended family communities, introduced globalized values in the form of materialism and individualism that have particularly affected the hip hop generation born up under this. And it put our communities in a position of choosing between 2 cultures. Now, as I pointed out before, our communities were not conscious of this. In fact, do not give your enemy too much credit, because we got a conspiracy thing for everything. The enemy did not do this, with the exception of drugs, which they knew the consequences of, to cause a choice between 2 cultures, because the enemy didn't think we have a culture. And we got a whole lot of Black people who think we don't have a culture. So don't give them too much credit here. This was an unintended consequence. And it was one that was so new that it took God to give me the light to see what's the basic cause. And the main point I'm making here is, if the forces that have hit us have put us in the position of choosing between African American, and I'm going to show you in a minute, African Caribbean and African culture, and Euro-American culture, or European culture if you're outside the US, or it may be Euro-American because Euro-American culture penetrates the world, then it means that we've got to make the right cultural choices as we organize politically, economically, socially, and culturally. We've got to make the right choices. And that means we need to know the best of our culture as well as its weaknesses so we can discard it. I'm talking African. And we need to know the best of African American culture, best of African Caribbean culture, the cultures of Africans around the world, its weaknesses and strengths, negate the negative and build on the positive. So the choice between 2 cultures is essential for us recovering power and rebuilding Black families, extended families, and communities. And so I'm drawing on the trois because they're going to give us the best formula, not the only one, but a key one. And you're going to see it's already in you because this is a part of your culture. In past shows, I've gone into structural adjustment and showing how Africa in the 80s was presented by the United International Monetary Fund and World Bank with loans conditioned on the fact that they do things that would weaken them, such things as eliminate free education, eliminate free healthcare, and sell off their gold, their iron, their uranium, and everything else for nothing, and even sell their water off to private corporations. And South Africa has been under that kind of thing. So this was designed to pull out as much wealth out of Africa as possible, while also carrying out resource wars in the Congo, where millions of Congolese have been murdered. These forces have also caused the choice between two cultures, in that we're seeing behavior in the African world that we've never seen before. Child soldiers being used and sometimes being recruited. And as they're recruited into armies by older Africans who are being paid by multinationals, or who are engaged in conflict to take control of particular countries like Sierra Leone or Liberia during that period in which this occurred. And some of these kids being told to kill their own parents. Now, these are things that while colonialism brought in its negative thing, now this is operating under different circumstances where these powerful hostile forces, in this case caused by international agencies and programs, particularly monitored by the United States, European Union, this has put Africa in this position. So if Africa is going to move forward, Africa is going to have to draw from the best of its past, its culture, its spirituality, its economic and social systems, to revive the systems that Africans are governed under, and to strengthen extended families, lineages, clans, and families in Africa. So it's a similar situation in the Caribbean. And I'll use one example because I want to note a positive thing before I get into this. My wife's from Barbados. And I'm not saying this because she's my wife, but I've had a chance to really observe Barbados and how it's run, an island of approximately 200,000 Africans. And by the way, the average Black woman in Barbados doesn't straighten her hair. And they're not running around shouting Black power or Black pride, but they exude it. And it's one of the best run governments on the planet. And the key thing is, they're people who end up being the prime minister or serving in the government or doing professional services on that island, generally come out of their school system, and they're the smartest. They may go to Britain, go to Oxford or the United States, these Ivy League things, but they come back, some of them stay abroad, but some of them come back to Barbados and they end up running an island honestly. They've only had one administration that didn't do this. And they've got a current government right now that's running very well. So when I talk about the Caribbean, and when I talk about Africa, I want to note that there are places in the world where Africans are running things well. And one key reason is in Barbados, their leaders actually like their people. And they don't have to walk around with armed security. They're in the pub drinking, socializing, and you can go to a street party and it can be the prime minister holding the party. You know what I mean? So that's because the Barbadian likes themselves. And unfortunately for them, they don't have some of the goodies that the West is usually looking for. But looking at the choice between two cultures, and by the way, I think Barbados is going to have to be careful to look at this choice between two cultures, because now they have people being shipped back from the United States who committed crimes. And after they served their terms, they're sending them back. And you're seeing a rise in guns and violence and stuff, but not on the level that you see almost anywhere else. But they're going to have to be alert to this phenomenon and check it so that people are not in a position where they have to make this choice. But the country that, again, was affected by the external forces most in the Caribbean, or at least one of them that was was Jamaica. And I want to say something about the Jamaican people. They're a bad people. What I mean is proud, and they play above their weight, meaning the African in the United States, our culture and our movements have the power to create chain reactions. When we move, the world moves. Africans on the continent have that same power. When they move, the world moves. Occasionally, the Jamaicans do. And while they may compare themselves to smaller islands and call themselves biggie, biggie, in the context of the world, they're small in numbers, but they play way beyond their weight level. Look at Marcus Garvey. You know what I mean? Look at Bob Marley. You know what I mean? Look at the culture of the Rastafarian. You know, so that's a strong group of people, as are all the Africans throughout the world and in the Caribbean. Now, in Jamaica, that country faced hostile economic attacks, particularly at the time of the socialist government of Michael Manley in the 70s. Jamaica had been self-sufficient in ground provisions, producing the basic foodstuffs that you need to survive. Now, as has been pointed out to me, too many Africans have been conditioned to want goods produced somewhere else. So Jamaicans had that problem. But they, up to the 70s, were basically self-sufficient in the basic things that you need to survive in an agricultural economy. But the United States brought the Jamaican economy and the Europeans, but especially the United States, to its knees by unfair trade agreements negotiated in exchange for loans that wiped out its milk industry and put American powdered milk in its place because it was allowed to come in without any tariffs. Tariffs are the taxes that you put on goods coming from other countries that protect your own goods. Without tariffs, America would not have the economy it has. Of course, without slavery and without genocide, it wouldn't have the economy it has. So when the Jamaican government went for loans, international loans, these were the conditions. And then it's bauxite and uranium industries were always in a bind because they were not able to gain a fair price for the uranium. And when they tried to raise it, then of course the international community, led by the United States, would go to other Caribbean or other countries that produce these raw materials. And so we see in the case of Jamaica, the intervention of outside hostile forces in the form of the CIA that brings in drugs, the US government that supports the government of the political party of Siaga, and corporate culture that brings this economy down and has put Jamaica in a position where an island on the surface is a heaven on earth, is a hell for the majority of the people. And with the introduction of drugs and gangs, you have, again, this choice between two cultures phenomenon where that culture of violence is putting a lot of Black youth in a marginal position, and where, again, the rich Afro-Jamaican culture, which is basically an African culture, which is the culture of the Caribbean, is threatened by these external forces. And so again, the way forward for African people is to make the right cultural choices. And that's true for Africans in Europe as well, in the UK, where there is drug dealing, some little gangs, but nowhere near as serious as here. And you have Black youth going to prison and some dying through being engaged in this traffic, but not on the level of here. So my topic for today is the trois, mothers and fathers of humanity, creators of African and world civilization. It's designed to draw lessons from Africa's rich historical and cultural past for the purpose of strengthening African-American communities, African-American families, African-American extended families, for strengthening African Caribbean families, extended families, and nations, and African extended families, communities, and nations, and Africans in Europe as well. And for anyone else that wants to use this, this can be helpful to you as well. So in a historical era that I would call, this is an era of a choice between two cultures. The rebuilding of African and African-American and global African extended family communities and nations requires that we draw from the best models of Africa's historical and cultural past. This means restoring historical memory, because we as Africans who have undergone enslavement especially suffer from historical amnesia. Sometimes amnesia is induced by being hit upside your head, and you may lose your memory. It might be an accident or something. We got hit upside the head by enslavement. We got hit upside the head by colonialism, and our miseducated leaders got hit upside the head by the amnesia induced by miseducation, or what I call whiteitis. And that is, of course, one of the diseases that affects African leaders and Black leaders to some extent in this country, who have undergone an education that has turned them against their own culture and their own people, and have taught them the importance of greed, the importance of the individual over the group. So we have to restore historical memory. And I don't know how many Black people I hear saying, what did I lose in Africa? Why is Africa important? I've even had scholars tell me, that they don't see the importance of African history. Some of them are psychologists. They're not the Afrocentric psychologists, Well, everybody is a living embodiment of their history. And here's the rule. If you don't know the whole of it, including the best, you are almost doomed to live the worst. You hear me? And if someone else, and this is something that I got from my sister, Sandrea Bradley, and she'll be on a couple of shows where we're going to do something on astrology. And I'm going out on a limb with some people here, because African-centered people don't want to hear about no astrology. Yeah, well, God within, please believe me, you need to know the master plan that explains your character. So my sister made an observation once. She said, if your enemy knows more about you than you do, you got a problem. Now, most of our enemies do not, but there are those who specialize in this. They specialize in studying the Negro. Some of them specialize in studying Africa. Some of them specialize in studying the Black mentality. And so even for the ignorant, who are the leaders who may not know this, they're being advised by people who do. So we're running around here acting like we're comfortable in not knowing our past. And I know the people that watch this show are not in that group, but I'm speaking also to a broader audience. Some of us feel comfortable not knowing. You hear me? So restoring historical memory and cultural memory, which we lived our culture, but we're not conscious often that it's African, is key. And this is also why we're looking at the trois and their role as fathers and mothers of humanity and creators of African and world civilization. So I want to start off this part of this discussion with an observation by the great historian, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, who was the father of chematology, or this idea that Kemet is Black. That's what Kemet meant, KMT, it meant Black. It was a Medu or a Kemetic or Egyptian writing symbol of a Black person. And that was their designation for their country, land of the Blacks, meaning Black-skinned people. Diop made this assertion, which is absolutely correct. And by the way, Shekinah Diop was a physicist, a historian, a linguist, a master scholar. And Dr. Theophile Obenga, who is alive still today, who was just had a university built in Congo, Brazzaville, named after Dr. Theophile Obenga, was a member of our faculty for 12 years at San Francisco State. He is today Dr. Shekinah Diop's best student. So Dr. Diop made this assertion. He said, "For Kemet is to Africa what Greece is to Europe." And so by this, he meant that for Europeans, Greece is their central civilization. And therefore, to understand, and I'm always use this word so-called, to understand so-called European civilization, because of the number of white historians have said the idea of European or Euro-American civilization is a novel idea, because to have civilization, you must be civilized. To reduce it to its most basic level, as John Henry Clark would define it, you must behave in a civil way. And so I would call what has been constructed by the Greeks and by their successors as so-called civilization, so-called, because the civil behavior has been absent. And that is the essence of being civilized, not measured by your bank account, not measured by your skyscrapers, not measured by your military power. It's measured by the civility of a people. But still, Diop is making the point, you can't understand Europe unless you understand Greece. Greece is the model for European so-called civilization. We also know, and we're the first ones, and I know some people here are going to scratch this in if I don't say it, because I got conscious listeners. We also know that Kemet played the central role in the formulation of Greek civilization. And George James, in his book, Stolen Legacy, was one of the first to note this, but we can go too far with that hypothesis. In other words, saying that everything that the Greeks had was stolen by the Kemites. Then you have to explain this uncivil behavior. You have to explain Hesiod, who argued for arbitrary freedom. You have to explain the warring city-states that fought each other all the time. One reason why the Greeks could not do what the Kemites or Egyptians did, build a national state. And that was because of the Aryan model that comes in to Greece and dominates Greece. So while Kemet plays, Egypt plays a key role in the formulation of a lot of principles that we would call principles of so-called Western civilization or Greek civilization, at its core, Greece is Aryan. And I've discussed the Aryan before briefly. Some other time we'll go into it. So we know Kemet is like the central civilization of the world. It is the greatest civilization of the world. And it was a Black civilization. And this is a key thing that we shouldn't even have to discuss. Who's going to run around saying and going into an argument that the Chinese are Asian or that the Europeans are white? You know what I mean? Who's going to argue that? Only a people who have been brainwashed with a new historiography in which Hegel was a major architect, in which he says Kemet or Egypt, he didn't call it Kemet, he said Egypt was a part of the spirit of Asia. Now, how in the holy hell that a country that's in Africa, in this case, the northern part, how can it be a part of the spirit of a people that hadn't even built the civilization at the time in which Kemetic existed, came into being 10,000 BC? My specialty is pre-dynastic Kemetic, and we're going to get into that in another show. Most scholars deal with dynastic. I do too, but I like to deal with what's not covered. I'm not getting into a people done good work. I'm not going to reproduce that. I'll draw from it, use it, and give them credit. But how could a people who had not built civilization yet be the basis for the spirit of the greatest civilization in the history of the world, and a Black civilization, which was a matter-of-fact observation of Herodotus, was a matter-of-fact observation of all people in the ancient world. For the Kemites, and Herodotus is a Greek historian, and he made the comment that for the people of Egypt are like the Colchians. They have black skin and woolly hair. And he thought that that was such a non-controversial subject that to prove that the Colchians had an Egyptian relationship, he wanted to go into other practices, such as circumcision, that the Colchians practiced and that the Egyptians or Kemites practiced. And that to him was better proof that they were Kemites, because Black civilizations were everywhere. So what's the big deal? It's only with the inferiority mentality of what some people call white supremacy, because I would say that white racism is based on the inferiority complex. Because if you're going to put whole groups of human beings down and say that they are uncivilized and barbaric, when in fact you're doing the uncivilized barbaric things to them, and when you're noting the high level of civilization that they've achieved, as Cortez noted when he goes into the Aztec and Mayan civilizations, and as Europeans observed when they went into Africa, then the only way you can construct the notion that other people are inferior is that you have a deep sense of inferiority yourself. Remember that debate with James Baldwin. When that N word was being used, he said it was the European that was that, they invented it. And we need to quit calling ourselves by something that they invented, which comes out of their sense of nothingness. Because you can't invent something like that unless it resides within you. So it's only with the rise of slavery and imperialism that we have this rewriting of history where Blacks are being written out of history, and Hegel is the architect, though racism in general is the basis for writing us out of history, not only of Kemet, just about all the great achievements in history that you've achieved are written out. So no people in the world would think that their historical past had no meaning to them unless they had been hit upside the head by amnesia, by enslaved and colonial induced amnesia. And I should say most of the people in the villages of Africa do not think that way. You know, it's the leaders, and not all of them, but it's mainly the miseducated who take on that attitude. So to say we didn't lose anything in Africa, there's a whole lot that we lost by not knowing what we had. No Chinese person is going to say that there's no need to know 2,000 years of Chinese history, though most Chinese don't know it. They have a sense of it. They're told by their leaders that they've been around 2,000 years. And if they take that position, then they're going to turn their back on gunpowder, which they invented, the printing press, and Confucianism, let alone Lao Tzuism, which are philosophies and technological innovations that they brought into the world. No Japanese is going to turn their back on their history because they know without a knowledge of that, there would have been no Meiji Restoration, Meiji, which was a period where the Japanese decided to industrialize and modernize because they saw that if they didn't, they would be conquered. But they built it on their past. Now, Africa's had that difficulty because Japan wasn't invaded and China was only invaded on its borders. So there are reasons why we have amnesiac problems, and we were enslaved and then drummed into our head for 400 and some odd years, this notion that a savage in Africa, a slave in America, and some of us bought into it. So Kemet is the central civilization of Africa, as Greece was to Europe, because it's its highest expression of civilization. No civilization accomplished as much. More important, Kemet is the greatest achievement in civilization throughout the world, bar none. So if you have created the greatest civilization in world history, why wouldn't you want to claim it? Everybody else is. They'll whitenize Egypt. They'll make it any color other than black. So why wouldn't you want to claim it? Only because we've been brainwashed through a process of enslavement and colonization. So if you give up Kemet, you give up geometry, which you invented, medicine, which you pioneered, though you're not the inventors of it. You'll see in a minute who were the inventors. The greatest architectural achievements in the world, you'll give them up. The pyramids, the Sphinx. And by the way, what architects are also astrophysicists? Talk about building for eternity. They were building with their buildings aligned to the heavens, aligned to the stars. What kind of architecture is that? The greatest architectural wonders in the world. You innovated physics, their notion of the noon, electromagnetic energy being the source of life coming out of a primeval watery-like substance. So the very notion of beginning is grounded in what the world today anoints as the highest science, physics, but theirs was a spirit physics, meaning that they understood wave and particles as spirit energy coming from God. They innovated, along with the Dogons, the highest systems of astrophysics in the world, being the best at going back to origin or beginning. They created the greatest university system in the world called P.A.P.O, House of Life. And the book that I'm finishing now is showing how we carry those systems into America. Our best people have been educated through the P.A.P.O secret society systems, and we run around talking about, we ain't got no culture. Ought to be ashamed of yourself. Haven't you noticed that when Black people get into anything, we tend to be on the top, the best? Even when we're the worst. When I mean by that, I mean bad, we tend to be the best, but that's terrible. You know what I mean? But the thing is, we brought to the Americas a master system that produced a George Washington Carver, that produced a John Coltrane, and a host of others. Give up on Kemet, you give up on being the authors of the Pythagorean theorem. It wasn't Pythagoras that came up with that. He was educated in Kemet. In fact, he was the favored of the Kemites, of the Greek initiates. He spent over 20 years in the Kemetic mystery systems and had more influence on Plato than anybody else, even more than Socrates. And if you give up on Kemet, then those of you who are Christians are giving up on the Kemetic basis for Christianity, because Moses was a priest in the system of the Pharaoh Akhenaten, who gives birth to this idea. All Africans have always believed in one God. But what happens with Akhenaten is he eliminates the netters. And so it's only one God, that is Aten, the sun. And that is the foundation of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The 10 commandments that come out of the 42 confessions of innocence and so forth and so on. You give up on this, you've given up on yourself. So in turning our back on Black folks' greatest creations, we are denying that what we did yesterday, we can do even better today and tomorrow. What do Black parents tell their children? What do most parents tell their children? I want you to be better than me. What do great masters, when they're training novices, hope for? They hope that their students will exceed them. I've got a student, Ricky Vincent, who wrote a book called Funk. It was a $6.99 independent study paper, which is a paper you write in place of a class. And I gave him an A+. I should have given him an A++. Right now, he's on radio dealing with Tower of Power. And he does the Funk Show on KPFA every Friday. I'm going to have him on here because we're going to be dealing with the funky funk and soul and all this other stuff. A brother named Scott Brown, who wrote a book on US organization, is a master in the funky funk. You know what I mean? All of this is coming out of this spirit-based African culture. So deny your greatness, then you're denying your own possibility for and potential for achieving greatness today and tomorrow. So we're at a historical period of a choice between two cultures where if you and I are going to strengthen Black families, extended family communities, and nations, we got to draw from the best of our culture to strengthen our people. If we go into the ring as boxers would in a fight, because we are in a fight, without a knowledge of our past, it's like a boxer going into the ring with his hands tied behind his back. And there's no way you can win unless you're just into kickboxing. And even the kickboxers in martial arts, they use their hands too. So if you want to be effective in the world, you got to know as much about yourself as humanly possible. So we got to get out of this, what I call the remote control automatic pilot 00 soul Negro, which I once was, not knowing who you are. And I know the people who are listening right now, you're conscious that's not your state, but too many of our people are still in that state. Now I want to paraphrase a great poet coming out of the Black arts movement, Askia Muhammad Toure. And he won the National Book Award for a book of poetry called From the Pyramids to the Projects. So I hope he doesn't mind me using a metaphor on this. And it's kind of like saying that if you want to deny your great past, it's kind of like you would prefer the projects to the pyramids. Or put it more graphically, you'd rather be one of those remote control N-words that is banned from this show. You'll never hear it. Rather than being an African, a Black African, an African American. I don't have a problem with any of it. You know what I mean? As long as Africa's somewhere up in it. So why the trois? While Kemet, now I want you to really get this one here. While Kemet is the greatest achievement in world civilization, it is to the trois that Africa and the world owe civilization itself. It is the trois who are the authors of civilization in its most basic and its most profound meaning. They are the most civil people on the planet Earth, were and still are. So the trois are the authors of world civilization, but they are also the authors of Kemetic civilization. If you read my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures, you'll see that I'm not covering the Kemetic part today. I'm dealing with the trois. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say about the trois before I get into their contribution to the world in terms of civilization, and then concretely, the civilizational contribution itself. The trois have been discounted. They've been put out of history books, put into the field of anthropology, largely because starting with the Greeks, they have been reduced to the category of savage. And so until recently, even anthropologists saw them as a backward people. And in part, this is based on evolutionary theories that the beginning people are backward and stuff. And then on the assumption that hunter-gatherer life was backward and uncivilized, far from the truth. So they have been removed from the history books, and they've also been removed from philosophy. They're usually included under the category of worldview. And worldview is considered to be something less than philosophy. And of course, if you confine your thinking just to the world, when in fact African philosophy or deep thought, as the Dogon call it, deep knowledge is cosmic knowledge. It brings in the world, but it brings in the cosmos. And for the Dogon, multiple cosmoses. So you're negating the capacity of the world's first people who give birth to humanity and civilization. You're discounting their ability to think. And that's also a part of this Western project. So it's led many of us to neglect, and I'm talking about African and African-American historians, to neglect the study of the trois. So before I get into the trois contribution to world civilization, starting in Africa and spreading around the world, it's important to understand first that the trois give birth to humanity. That is, God did, but the trois are the first human beings. And trois origin of humanity is established best through genetic science. I think that archaeological digs and stuff, they're important and should be conducted, but you're always finding new digs, new finds that will make something else that showed the antiquity of a particular culture, in this case African, to be less than it was before. But the thing about genetics is that particularly mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA that comes from the mother, that is, it cannot be erased. That DNA is the best marker for determining time for a people. And so according to Dr. Wallace, a geneticist, who published an article in 2002 in the American Journal of Human Genetics, they were looking at fragments discovered in the Kalahari Desert and in the Congo. And what they concluded was that the Kun people of Northwest Kalahari Desert, which is in South Africa, people that I study carefully in the Mother Principle and also in the Integration Trap, the Kun people of the Kalahari Desert in South Africa and the Biaka, B-I-A-K-A, trois of Central Africa, which is the Congo, they are the root people, the mothers and fathers of humanity. Now, this finding based on mitochondrial DNA lineage coming from the mother is based on the L mitochondria lineage. L is the parental lineage for Africans. And from this parental lineage comes the lineage of Asians and Europeans. So, and theirs is of a different mitochondrial DNA. So all human beings on the planet are descended, as we already know, from a common African ancestor. And the trois are African and they're Black. They're Black. And another thing that some anthropologists have tried to do is separate them from other Africans. The only difference between them and other Africans is size. They're small, usually under 5 feet. They're fully formed, you know, human beings. They're just small. And small is like the beginning of everything. You could say God is no thing and everything. You know what I mean? And all things begin small. So the trois are Black people, an African people. Mitochondrial DNA dates them back to 144,000 years, give or take 10,000 years. The error in mitochondrial DNA is 10,000 years. So it could be 10,000 years more, 154,000, or less, 134,000. But that's the realm of time for the beginning of what's called Homo sapiens sapiens, that is human beings. We're not talking Lucy. Lucy was a primate that had human characteristics, but was not human. Had human qualities, but not human. We're talking about fully formed human beings. So the fact that humanity has a common origin, it means, first of all, you can't talk about superior, inferior people. In fact, this notion of race is a European invention. We've had to deal with it, so we have race consciousness without being racist. So what we have to understand then is that human beings have a common source. And if there's anything special we can say about African humanity is we are the source. That's kind of special. And I think that affects the mentality of African people. There's a mothering and fathering instinct that comes from that. There's a humane instinct that comes from that. So this is a key quality in terms of understanding the trois and their role in being the first human beings. So before examining the trois cultural contributions, which are key to revitalizing African families and communities and nations globally and in the United States, it's important to note the global scope of trois contributions. The trois, the Kung in the Kalahari Desert, who, by the way, speak a click language, which is the oldest language spoken by human beings, still spoken today. And that click language has influenced the languages of a lot of speakers in South Africa or the Southern African region. The Kung come into being 144,000 years, and it takes about 100,000 years before agriculture is innovated. And agriculture is innovated by African women, trois women, who experimenting with wild plants come up with agriculture. And so to explain the contribution of the trois globally, it's necessary to understand migratory patterns. And so what we see is Africans began to migrate out of Africa into Asia first, between 45,000 and 50,000 BC. It was thought at one time that they migrated to Europe first, but they migrated to Asia first, and these were trois, and to America. The first people in this place called the United States were migrating trois, coming from the Kalahari Desert. These migrating Africans were called Grimaldi men and women. According to Dr. Sheikana Diop, these Africans reached Spain and southern France at the end of the worm glaciation period, between 40,000 and 20,000 BC. And so these are the first humans to come into Europe. And so there's a brief respite in terms of this ice age where they're able to get into Europe, and then they get caught in the ice age. So when Grimaldi man undergoes and woman undergoes the ice age, then you see mutation of human beings in Europe from black to white due to weather, due to the cold climate. The Basque people who live in southern Spain are one of the descendants of Cro-Magnon men and women, these who develop out of these migrations and become white. So in tracing the migrations of the trois out of Africa, we find that they bring civilization, first humanity and civilization, to Portugal and Germany and England before these countries had those names. And so they were called Picts, P-I-C-T-S, and Caps, C-A-P-P-S. First people there. Introduced civilization there. The trois were the first people in Scandinavia. They were known as Finns. Finland is named after them. Did you know that? My wife attended an artistic exhibition where a friend of hers who's a teacher in the UK was presenting her artwork on the trois. And every year the Swedes honor the trois as the first people in their country. The first people in Canada are called Skraelings, S-K-A-R-E-L-I-N-G-S. And they were noted to be mound builders. They were the first people who also lived off of the tip of South America, and they're called Fuegians, F-U-E-G-I-A-N-S. A skull of a young Black woman was found in South Central Brazil. They renamed her Luzia, L-U-Z-I-A. She dates back 11,500 years ago, a trois. She was 4 feet tall, hunter-gatherer. So this also proves that the African presence, as a brother named Imhotep, who's written a book on the African presence in America, also documents that our presence here precedes Native Americans. We're not saying that therefore Native Americans don't have a right to this land. We're just saying we're the first all over the planet, you know. The stone architectural mounds or stone hinges found in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, according to David McRitchie, an authority on this, these were created not by Europeans, but by trois, who spoke this same click language. And these were Kung people. Now, the structures found there, Stonehenge, these were astronomical markers. At another point, when we get into pre-dynastic Kemet, we'll see how that worked in ancient Kemet. A couple of years ago, my wife and I, we vacationed in Hawaii, and I purchased a number of books on Hawaiian history. I'd already been studying it and got more. I came back with a whole lot of Hawaiian books. And I learned that the first people in Hawaii are trois people called Menehune, M-E-N-E-H-U-N-E. Their art is found all over Hawaii. Now, in the 80s, I would travel to Hawaii with my mother. And this is a picture of the art, which is called Petroglyphs, that are found in the stone, in caves and whatnot in Hawaii, petroglyphs. You see this same kind of hieroglyphic writing in pre-dynastic Kemet, and you find it all over Africa. So these are the first people in Hawaii. The first people in the Philippines were not Asians. They were small people, trois, that with the Spanish occupation, the people in Hawaii call Negritos. And I'll make mention of them again. In Indonesia, on the island of Flores, Flores, skeletons have been found of trois people called Hobbits, Hobbits, first people in Indonesia. In India, while we know that the Dravidians were the first large population group, the first people in India found in the Bay of Bengal in the Andaman Islands, Andaman, and these trois were called Jara, Jara, and they settled in these islands approximately 60,000 BC. So the first people in India, and the genetic tests show that they are related to the trois of Africa. The first people in China were Anu. These were trois people who settled in the south of the Yangtze River as one of the oldest Neolithic. Neolithic is a period of early agriculture sites in China. So you're finding the Anu as the first people in the south of the Yangtze River in China. And they date back to 6,000 to 4360 BC. When Mao Zedong was carrying out his long march, he had to negotiate with the Black Chinese in southern China to get his passage through. And I'm sure they wanted some rights under a new China, since they were the founders of it. You hear me? The first people in Japan were trois people also called Anu, A-I-N-U, who arrived in Japan between 7,000 BC and 250 BC. Now, when I was teaching history at San Francisco State, I had an exchange student who was from Japan. So she gave me three statues of the Anu. This, you can see this here. See those African features? See those big lips? Huh? That nose? Now, the inscription is in Chinese because in this part of Asia, the people write in a Chinese script or they speak their own language. So I had the chair of Asian American Studies to read the script. What did it mean? This is a female, by the way. It meant female general. Female general. Meaning that women exercised a very high position in Japanese society as Anu, which is true of all of the trois societies. And by the way, the founders of Kemetic were Anu. I'm not going into that today. So take a very good look at that. But then the two smaller figures are male. Now, it doesn't mean that the woman was larger. It meant that the size of the statue is an indication of her central importance, because among the trois, women played a very central and important role. And there was no abuse of African women. Women exercised a powerful position in African society. And it is this legacy of the trois that accounts for the status of African women in African civilizations more than anything else. Because when you're looking at various societies, that you may find in Europe, for example, that were African societies in the beginning, what always distinguishes them from the Aryan societies that follow, such as the Etruscans, who are the first people in the area today that you call Rome, These were people who did not speak the Roman dialect. These were a people who did not practice patriarchy. These were people that had great honor for their women. And that's the same with the first people in Greece who are called Pelagians. These were people who also honored women. And during that time in Greece, women exercised real power. And by the way, in China, during the Anu period, the women were in charge. Sisters, you hear that? They told the men to get wood and fetch water. And it was a peaceful period. So this is the trois contribution to civilization. This describes the geographical presence of the trois, and I'm only giving a small part because they're everywhere. They're all over the world. And by the way, it's not only the trois who are honored, but in these societies also where you find the trois spirits are. And that's a whole nother thing that I'll get into in a minute. So understanding the geographical presence of the trois in world history establishes the fact that they're the mothers and fathers of humanity. And so you find their presence all over the world. And I'm asserting that therefore they're also the mothers and fathers of the civilizations that are following. And what I want this morning to concentrate on is the role that the trois play in civilization, particularly in Africa, and how that role then impacted the Africans who migrate, who in the beginning are trois, to Europe and to Asia and to the Americas. So I'll focus on trois contributions to Africa, and this is some stuff you haven't heard before, and some that you have, but most of you haven't. So this is extremely important, that they are the authors of civilization and are the world's first human beings. Now, as a historian, as I've explained before, my method is to make the past serve the present. As a philosopher, history is a record of examining the deep thought of the people. It's not good enough to just know facts, dates, and places, but how did the people think? What was their culture? What was their deep thought? As a warrior scholar, then my question is, how do you use these models to reconstruct societies? In this case, rebuild families and communities, but reconstruct crooked societies into ones that are straight and just. And so the past plays a very important part in that. If you look at America, America is a reproduction of Europe and some of its worst features. This government, as I pointed out, is based on Locke's treaties on government, second treaties. Its political economy is again formulated out of European thought, Adam Smith. This country is a European project. It's just one problem. It's founded on an Indian foundation, and it made the mistake of bringing Africans and then other people of color into this reality. And the biggest thing they couldn't predict was that the demography would shift and the majority of this country would shift to black, brown, red, and yellow. And they sure enough couldn't predict that the African in America would create a culture that is the popular culture of the United States and the world, and the most complex culture in the United States, and probably the most complex in the world. And it is no accident that we see Blacks leading movements that have produced transformation, and you don't even give yourself credit for it. Trump was defeated by a Black Lives Matter movement and an epidemic called COVID-19. But it was the culture of Blacks that inspired Black youth, and then Asian, Latino, and white youth to go into the streets. but it's your culture that is the culture of popular choice that makes you a strategic African in the world today and enables you to create chain reactions. And in this particular case, enables you to conceive of something that is just, that can correct injustice. And that's really the lens that I'm looking at this through. And then being a spirit person and my best stuff coming from the spirit, then it is the spirit of the souls of Black folks. And then, of course, the spirit of Native Americans and the spirits of all people who want to bring about justice that will provide the basic source for creating a new day. We've talked about King and Malcolm. And, we've talked about how they reached a certain juncture where they wanted to restructure this country. The key thing about both of them is they were practitioners of the truth. They followed the truth. And that's true of our people in general. So my purpose for basing this dive into African history and basing it on first the trois is because they're the best model, the best foundational model, the best just model that we can use to understand, first of all, the secrets for the greatness of Black folks and Africans in the US and the greatness of Africans throughout the world. We need to identify these qualities of greatness that reside inside of us, which we tend to dismiss since we're being fed someone else's diet intellectually, historically. Black folks in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Europe, and in the South Pacific, and Asia, have a central quality bequeathed to them by the trois and by our ancient African cultures that come after them, but especially the trois. What is this great quality? I want to really stress this because this is a quality that is ordinary for most Blacks. It's ordinary for most African people. And it's ordinary for Native Americans. But it is a quality of greatness that is extraordinary and exceptional for most people. And so maybe this is one reason why we take this for granted, but I think there are other reasons. What is the quality that carried Africans in the US and the Western Hemisphere through the horrific experience of enslavement and colonialism? Might say the same for Native Americans through genocide. What is that quality that enabled Blacks in the United States to create a new African culture, the popular culture of the US and the world, and an art form, and a complex one too? What quality resides in the souls of Black folks that inspired our people to create beauty in a society full of ugliness? What is that quality? What quality resides in the souls of our people in the US and Africa, the Caribbean, South America, Europe, and Asia, and the South Pacific that will make us take in strangers and feed them when we barely have enough food to feed ourselves? What is that quality? What is the quality that produced love between Black men and women on the plantation when the sister didn't have no dress to beautify herself, no makeup to put on? You know what I mean? Neither did the brother even often have shoes to wear. What is that quality that created love on the cotton patch? Both the sharecropping patch and the plantation cotton patch. What was it? What was that quality? What is that quality that produces the dignity of impoverished Africans in the continent of Africa, living sometimes on less than $1 a day. What is that quality of greatness? That same quality you find in the poor areas among Blacks in Brazil and among the native people. What is that quality that inspired the trois to pass the keys to civilization to Africa and to the rest of the world? Now I'm gonna make this real simple because there's a lot of qualities. I could list them, but I'm just gonna put it under one heading. One heading. It is the quality of character. It is the quality of character. The magnificent character of African people, wherever they were in the world, has been that quality that has enabled us, when we seem to have been down, as far down as you could get, and enabled us to rise up. It's that quality of character that could carry us through cloudy days and cloudy nights, periods of trials and tribulations of the worst kind of inhumanity human beings had ever expressed, other than what Native Americans expressed, because nothing's worse than genocide. What is that quality? It's a quality of character, because character is that quality no matter what your gifts are. When you are put in a corner, when you are down, when it looks like you have no chance, it's the character that you draw from that is the key quality that makes you great. It's the quality of greatness that we too often miss when we look at the enslaved Africans, the colonized Africans, whatever part of the world they came from. It was this quality that is the true quality of greatness. It's one thing to have a few individuals in a group to have high character. It's another thing for that to be a common quality. And that's a common quality among our people. What is exceptional for some folks is ordinary for most of us. Now, I admit that with the forces that have hit our community, some of our people have no character. Some of them have stepped out of character. Some of them have become the kind of characters that are purely despicable. In fact, we've seen the emergence of a new type of human being that really is not human, but has some qualities that are not humane, that are the result of these powerful forces, and drugs is one of the things that help create that. And of course, greed. When you're consumed by greed, then the best qualities of human character go out the window, because the greedy person is possessed with a force that's like a demon. And so the qualities of goodness go out the window, not completely, but largely. So this choice between two cultures, we never had this before, where we had a situation where we could even make a choice. Our enslaved ancestors created a new African culture. And yes, we've always had contradictions, but that was not the majority. And that Willie Lynch stuff is pure BS. Manu Ampin, that was on the show on King 2 times, he wrote the book on that. I already knew it. I mean, ain't nobody walking around waving a wand on us, and suddenly we have lost everything. You know what I mean? There was a cultural war on the plantation because those fighting that war, they were African fundamentally. So it's this character quality that is the most important quality. This high character, this character of nobility. It's a common feature among our people. And as Zora Neale Hurston observed, the closer to slavery, the more African we were, the greater the character, the more noble the character. The true basis for greatness, it's in the character of our people. In Tanzania, the term for everyday people is Wananchi, everyday people, W-A-N-A-N-C-H-I, everyday people, people of dignity. That's true of Africans around the world, maybe materially poor, but not spiritually, not culturally, not morally. And this is the greatest legacy that the trois gave to Africa. This is the greatest legacy the trois gave to the world. It's the greatest legacy that the trois gave to us. And I was doing a book tour in 1995 when the Mother Principle came out. I went to John Henry Clark's house and gave him a copy of the Mother Principle. He had written one of the introductions and got to see his huge library. I've mentioned this before. Of 25,000 books, and got to tell him what my next book is on, which I'm still working on. So it's been almost 25 years I've been working on this book on 7. And so after leaving John, I spoke in Brooklyn at a bookstore. There was an African there, and he made this comment about Blacks in America. He said, the African American is basically trois-like. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, you don't like hierarchy. You don't like anybody over you telling you what to do. Now that's the African American, but that's also the African period. The African is hard to organize because we all got to have a say-so in it. If Black families are going to be rebuilt, extended family communities rebuilt, then the relationship between males and females has got to be a more balanced relationship. And those family systems that work, as I pointed out before, are ones that, there's a balance between males and females. There's a respect between the two. And that is where democracy comes from. If you got a family, you got to be listening to what your mate thinks or your lover. Because a lot of you are in permanent relationships, long-term relationships. Some of you ain't marrying now, because of the cost of marriage and all the things that have happened. Some of us have come to distrust or mistrust this institution of marriage. So this trois character, it's essential to us. If you're looking at Black Lives Matter, leaderless, that's coming from the trois. We'll get into that one in a minute. So we tend to think that people who are down in the mud, most depressed, are the ones who are most backward. You know what I mean? But in fact, it was that down in the mud period, the harsh period of oppression, where our people showed the greatest signs of greatness. And it's in hard times that we tend to also rise and show our greatness again. So the average Black or the average African, and the further back you go, the truer this is the true lady and the true gentleman. The African-American woman, for example, has a concept of womanism, in which she's got the feminine qualities. She knows how to twitch, but she's got strength. You understand? She ain't following behind no man, the majority, some do, and that's something you need to get out of. She's alongside of him, telling him what she thinks, and they're making decisions together. And it's her brain and his brain that make things work. So these are trois qualities that lie down deep inside of us. Why did Blacks pick the kind of churches they picked? Because this is a whole nother thing. We're gonna go into the formation of Black spirit institutions that a lot of us have the wrong reading on. I'm gonna have James Smalls and a few other people on who really know this. And, we don't understand, Blacks made the choice at the end of enslavement to call their thing Christianity, but what they dropped into it, that wasn't Christian. And a lot of it still isn't. And one of the key criteria was that the house that you chose for your worship, which was your place where you did everything in the South, was one where everybody had a say-so. So we wouldn't choose anything that was dictatorial, even though preachers got to act like that. And so that was, again, your trois legacy, which is they're the authors of democracy, consensus-based, as I pointed out before. So a lot of these choices that we made, we consider to be brainwashed because they have the label Christianity on it. Those making the choice were basing it on African principles. So this greatness of character is the key to the noble characters of Black folks that makes the average Black man and Black woman, average African man or African women, people who are aristocrats. And the older you are, the clearer it is that that was the case. So we create an art form, which has many levels, starting with the spiritual blues, then the blues, then jazz, gospel blues, soul, rhythm and blues, funk, hip hop. But it's an aristocracy of democracy. The aristocrats are the musicians in the case of the art form when we're talking about music, because it's our highest expression of the art forms. Because of the outlawing of the drums, music becomes like our main avenue for that form of creativity. So you have aristocratic Democrats, meaning the heads of a blues band, big or small, a combo or a big band, would have the aristocratic qualities of a Duke Ellington, but the democratic qualities of improvisation. Even though Duke Ellington wrote his music out, his players would also play off of their souls. It's an aristocracy of count bases. Queen Aretha, and in hip hop, Latifah, Kings Martin and Kings B.B. King, and Prince Malcolm. You hear me? So the aristocracy was that quality of character. Not all musicians had it, but many did. John Coltrane, a man of magnificent character, so magnificent they called him Sweetness because he was so nice. Even on drugs, he didn't lie, didn't steal. So it was this quality of character that translated into their art form. The quality of character that made El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, better known as Malcolm X, incorruptible. A quality shared with Paul Robeson, who was his greatest hero, his first master. This is the quality of our people. So the quality of noble character is what inspires Black families to raise children who may not even be of their own blood relations, and take them in and give them love. It is the quality of character that is the main lesson that Black parents teach their children. And any Black child who thinks that when a mother teaches them to be kind, they're teaching them to be soft, they're getting the wrong message, because they're not teaching you to be soft, they're teaching you to be humane. And that is the most important quality that we receive as a people. And we know today, in revitalizing extended families and two-parent households and extended family communities, good parenting is essential. It used to be that was the parenting of the extended family community, where every elder played a role in raising their children, the children in the neighborhood. I broke the window of an old lady on Bush Street, right down the street from where I live. She gave me a whipping and then sent a message home to my mother, and I got a much worse whipping because my mother was the administrator of heavy, what the Caribbean people call heavy manners. I laughed when I got mine because I was just trying to get that heat off of me. And my brother told me shortly before he passed, he said, every time you laugh, she'd stop doing it to you and doing it to me. I said, why didn't you tell me? I wasn't doing it for that reason. I was doing it to get it off of me. You know what I mean? But the key point is that if you get touched anywhere in your formative period with some love, that is the key thing you need to grow. It's the water to the plant for a human being. And the trois start that watering. So these hostile forces that have been introduced into our community, that have put in the minds of some people that glitter, shiny things, dead presidents, corporate, materialistic, individualistic values are more important than being humane and kind. Well, see where that gets you. That'll get you a penitentiary cell or death, or service in the biggest gangster operation in the world that moves across the world. General Smedley Butler, I was in the Marine Corps in my brainwash days, the reserves. I didn't go anywhere. I just went to practice a couple of times a month and then war games twice a week. General Smedley Butler, who had been a 3-star general in the Marine Corps, 2-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, which is rare, you know, supposed to be brave for that. When he retired, he spoke to the American Legion and told them that he had been a gangster for the big banks. He said he could teach Al Capone, excuse me, Jesse. He could teach Al Capone some lessons about gangsterism because Al Capone ran a city. He said he ran wars on just about every continent. He was in China in the Boxer Rebellion, you know. He was intervening in the Philippines, you know, when they were overthrowing Black governments. You know, he was everywhere where you could put down anything that was good and replace it with something that was bad. You understand? So these are the choices you got if you don't choose your own way. There's a Black Freedom Army you can join. Get involved in that. And a lot of you who are reading, that reading is no good if you don't apply it to the liberation of your people. You hear me? And we'll be at another point in this show getting in deeper into the 6-fold stages to mental freedom, the transformation of consciousness. That only happens when, as one of our leaders in Pan-African Peoples Organization, Thabiti M. Tambuzi calls it, you undergo immersion. I call it internalization, where what you are learning in your history becomes a part of 24/7. Your waking and sleeping thoughts. You even dream this. You walk it and you talk it. It's not enough to just read it, but we need to read it. Reading's important. Can't lead yourself or your community. And now we need collective leadership in our community unless we read. But we need to also read the souls of our people. And it's the character of our people that is crucial in this. So when we look at the Muhammad Ali's, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the George Floyd's, Black Lives Matter, they indicate that our people, when we make the right choices, make the choice for humanity, make the choice for serving something bigger than ourselves, rather than the trinkets. I was rewatching a show on Muhammad Ali, in fact, 2 shows last night, and I've never tired of watching anything on Muhammad Ali, because for me, the greatest quality of him was his character. He had the talent, but there's a lot of people who can go in a ring and knock somebody out. It's a brutal game. And he had the art. He had magnificent gifts that he had to work on, as he pointed out. But there was a time where he went to see one of his wives, and he had 9 children by different ladies, and took care of all of them, loved all of them. And when his wife, I think it was Veronica, she was the one that met him in the Congo when he had the big fight. She came back in tears, and her daughter said, "Why are you crying?" And she had explained, they had to divorce because Muhammad Ali had him a bunch of women. That's the nature of it. She understood that. She didn't like it, but she understood it. She said, "When I looked in his eyes, I saw God." And her daughter said, "I understand what she meant." She saw that twinkle that was in my daddy's eyes, the twinkle of kindness, the twinkle of love. His trainer said that what set him aside as a boxer wasn't just skill, it was character. That's what sets our people aside. And it is that was bequeathed to us by the Trois and the great civilizations of Africa, the positives that they introduced to us and to the world. Now, hunter-gatherer societies have been portrayed as backward, as I pointed out before. Historian named Gerhard Krauss makes the point that hunter-gathering way of life was the original affluent society where all the needs of a people were easily met, meaning hunting and gathering took very little time. And after that, people enjoyed leisure. So African people, and then others who lived this hunter-gatherer life in other parts of the world, starting with Africans, they had a lot of time for leisure and they were free of oppression. And so what you need to know, as I'm just going into one aspect of the trois, is some of the secrets to your future lies in your past. And you hear Europeans talking about socialism, those who are progressive. Bernie Sanders, who really is more of a Democrat, who's progressive, comes out of C.O.R.E and is not bad, it's not bad. And you have other whites who push socialism. But where's their history for sharing as a people? Where is their history? You have 144,000 years of it, and you should be using it to strengthen your families and communities. And in fact, that's what has enabled us to survive. It's been the communal ethos. We couldn't share land in the Western Hemisphere. It was owned. We were treated as property. But we shared what we got from the land. And that enabled us to survive. And the most important thing we shared was love and kindness. And so it is that communal ethos where in Africa, communalism is no one owns the land, air, and water. They share it and leave it in better condition than they received it. That is a trois legacy. And then that's a legacy of ancient African societies, particularly those that did not have kings and queens, but also those that did, because the kings did not own the land. No one did. So this idea of private property and the idea of land, air, and water is fiendish, because it means then that you create the conditions that now exist in the world for a few to grab almost everything and the rest to have almost nothing. And so it's these models that have been inside of us that have enabled us to share whatever we've had so we could survive. That is the key to us coming up with a view of just societies. So hunter-gatherer societies did not experience these extremes of wealth and poverty because they were founded first on the principle of character. It was founded on societies where there were no abuse of women or children or the old. And as I've noted before, when I received the beautiful light on the secret to the just societies of Africa, which led me to the trois, is that the secret to their justness is, and this comes from God again, this is the choice between two cultures, not my word. This doesn't come from me, it comes through me. These comes from the light. The just societies of Africa were those where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. And that became the model for balance. That was the model for justice of hunter-gatherer societies. And when they move into agrarian societies, particularly the classless age grade societies where you didn't have kings or queens, and the villages pretty much ran things, lineages and clans and extended families, was based on that kind of balance. And it is that kind of idea of balance that we have to restore in a new form, in a new age. We're going to have to be creative about it. So the trois are the authors of these extended family communities. Hunting bands were extended family bands made up of blood relations, and then within one particular unit of a hunting band, a family unit, but then of others as well. And these were extended families. And this served as the foundation out of which, when they moved to agriculture, that you begin to see the formation of African societies into lineages, which are larger family units, and clans, and then villages. They come out of this. So it's this extended family community that sustained us through the 80s, that drugs particularly tore a hole in, a big hole that we have to revitalize. So the key point here is the role that the trois play in civilizing Africans, the bigger Africans. What role did they play? At another point, we'll look at how this translates into the civilization of Kemet. What we find is that approximately 100,000 years ago, trois began to move into innovating agriculture. And while many remain hunter-gatherers, others become agriculturalists, and some do both. And so what we find throughout African societies, and particularly here, Niger, Congo, Bantu, the societies in Central Africa, the oral traditions in these societies all say that the trois or the batwa, the Kun, or the trois coming out of the Congo, were the indigenous teachers and guides. They were the moral, civilizational compass who taught the bigger Africans civilization. Specifically, the trois, according to African oral tradition, taught Africans agriculture, taught them against incest, taught them how to make fire, how to cook food, how to domesticate plants, how to weave, how to make pottery, and how to smelt iron, and the whole industry of metallurgy. They were the first to discover medicine. Dr. Theophile Obenga, I've mentioned this before, notes that the medical teachers of the people of the Congo are the trois, and they combine spirit with herbal treatment and other kinds of treatment. And the trois would often wear, those who were really gifted in this, leopard skins. They were priests, but who were healers. In ancient Kemet, the priests were also doctors, wore leopard skins coming from the trois. Above all else, the trois passed on, as I pointed out before, democracy, humanity, kindness, good character. They call themselves pure people. And they were they passed on, as I pointed out before, I point out in the integration trap, the concept of morality coming from their term Mazuri, Maasori, which is the origin of the term ma'at, harmony, truth, justice, balance, right order. The difference is they almost always practice it. They were practitioners of this. That's why they call themselves the pure people. In African culture, the people who are closest to God are considered to be the wisest and those most noble in character. The Bambara, when they talk about their elders, they talk about the chain of transmission, where the first elder received the truths that their society is based on from God, who they call Mangala. Again, Mazuri, Ma'at, Ma, and Gala, which is the name for God. And the term for man and woman among the Bambara is Ma, which means a divine being, one in which God resides. So the trois pass on the various elements of civilization, but the most important power that the trois possess to this day is a supernatural power. They are the people with the greatest paranormal powers, the ability to see ahead, the greatest in the power of intuition. In the integration trap, I note a case where Europeans had come into a trois hunting band. This was a number of years ago, wasn't that long ago. And we took them a 2-week walk to get to the trois hunting band's place. And when they got there, the trois could tell them everything they were saying for 2 weeks. The trois, I was in Ghana in 1990, right after I had this vision on the Just Society. And I may have mentioned this before. I met with Leonard and Rosalind Jeffries. Wade Nobles, Dr. Wade Nobles was there. And they brought in the greatest healer in Ghana. And she was a woman who had been initiated into healing by trois spirits called Emotia. And Emotia are materialized spirits whose feet are backward. And I asked her, I said, she was initiated into healing powers. I said, were these spirits or material beings? She said, material beings. Well, they were spirits that materialized as material beings. Dr. Wade Nobles has actually seen one in Ghana. I was teaching a class, San Francisco State, and I had a Filipino student. I was talking about this same stuff. She came to my office and told me that her mother, her grandmother, had been initiated into healing powers by the trois in the Philippines. I said, what power? She didn't know. I said, go back and ask your mother. She came back and said, the powers were the ability to look in a bowl of water and read the future. The power was to heal people. Well, this great Queen Mother in Ghana, who was the greatest healer in a particular area, had the ability to heal people from nervous disorders. She would go into a trance. Her daughter would translate what the spirit said about what was wrong with the person, and then she'd come up with a way to heal them. This is not just a quality that Africans have. A man named Edgar Casey has a whole library dedicated to the healing he did based on these same powers. He didn't know as much about where they came from. So the people in the Philippines have a saying, don't take your children near the forest early in the morning, because the little people will take them and they will come back with extraordinary supernatural powers. They are the masters of that. So what does this have to do with introducing civilization to African people? If you know anything about African civilization, you will know they're all spirit-based. Most people who write about Kemet miss the fact that the model of Kemet was heaven. Geography, the study of geography was based on the need to measure heaven. Can you imagine? The art was basically spirit art. the petrographs that I showed you from Hawaii. That is, we call it art, but it's entered a spirit realm. It has power. It has power. And so when these bigger Africans are moving into the Niger-Congo Bantu region and in other parts of Africa, and we'll see later at another time, we'll deal with Kemet. They are coming under the tutelage of the trois to be civilized. But the most important quality that they're seeking to gain from the trois are the supernatural powers. Why? Because Africans believe that their societies will not progress unless their lineage heads, their clan heads, and later their kings unless they're able to serve as communicators with the spirits, unless they're able to do the proper ritual to guarantee the prosperity of their people. And the main thing that the larger Africans, Niger, Congo, Bantu region, and other parts of Africa realizes when they come into these new areas where the trois are, the spirits that are important are trois spirits that occupy the land because they're the first comers. They're the first ones. And so they believe that they cannot prosper unless they're able to appease these spirits and do the right things so that their people will be able to give birth to children so that crops will grow and so that the people will prosper. And so there's a whole period where Africans enter into tutelage under these trois and where they are taught the lessons of civilization. And the most important are learning the lessons of the higher spiritual powers and how to pipe into them. Now, we know our enslaved African brothers and sisters, they look to diviners as their leaders on virtually every plantation. They drew down spirits by putting their heads under a bucket called hush harbors, where they would sneak away and face great punishment if caught, so that they could commune with the spirit. James Smalls was talking about in South Carolina, where he was raised, how before you could be admitted to the church, you had to go to the wailing bench and you could not join the church until the spirit visited you. And there were more praise houses in Africa than churches, and this particularly in South Carolina. And praise worship is the way in which Africans worship God, and that's the way the African American worships God, but you don't know it. You think, this is just brainwashed Africans up in here shaking tambourines and stuff like that. And April 9th, 1906, Black people in the United States getting tired of some of this stuff that was passing off as spirituality and wanting to return to the source that James Smalls referred to and others. They had what was called the Azusa Street Revival that took place in Los Angeles. So I said, April 9th, 1906, it went through to 1915. This was led by a preacher named William Seymour. This gave birth to the Pentecostal or Sanctified Church, founded by Blacks. It is the most African of the spirit possessions or spiritual possessions that we have. Best music comes out of it. The true connection to the spirit comes out of it. Praise worship comes out of it. What generally isn't noted is that William Seymour ran through the streets of Los Angeles with a bucket over his head. And that was the bucket of the hush harbor. He was saying that we're going to commune with the spirits of our people, going back to the source of African power, spirit power, but always combined with economic and political and social power, but is also at the heart of our character. Because when Muhammad Ali's wife said, former wife, that when she looked at him crying, she said, I was looking into the eyes of God. She was talking about that spirit that was inside of him, that goodness, that quality. So as I conclude today, African people in the US are faced with a choice between two cultures. We have to choose between a savage, materialistic, individualistic, violent, misogynistic, anti-female culture, or rich, noble, mighty, spirit-based, kindness-oriented, freedom-bound, noble, powerful, loving, and respectful culture. I say there's no choice. There is no choice. So let the noble trois, Batwa, Kemites, Hush Harbor, blues and spiritual blues people be the light of civilization that'll raise us up higher and higher as a people so that we can make the crooked straight, the unjust just, so that the hungry can be fed and no longer be hungry. So there's a roof over the heads of people who are sleeping on the streets. So that beauty is brought back into their lives in a way that they can enjoy it materially. It's in their soul, but they deserve to experience heaven on earth. Create your heaven here, and then enjoy that other heaven when you get there. Because everybody wants to go to heaven, as I said before, but nobody wants to die. I'm in that situation. So get all the heaven you can right now. And the greatest heaven is to realize the greatness inside of you, the greatness that resides in the souls of Black folks, the greatness that resides in all human beings, but it is wired in you. You're trois wired. You're Yoruba Kemetic wired, and I'm talking the best of it. And in the case of trois, almost all of it, because it was about as good as it gets. So Hotep, I hope you got something out of this. This is, as the hip hoppers would say, Black to the future, baby. Now we'll get to some comments and stuff. I'm going to be doing a show at 1 o'clock. It's coming through Wose Community Church on Malcolm. Me and James Smalls will be talking for 2.5 hours, and that'll come on at 1. Michelle Jewell, and unfortunately, church has a strong male base, which continues to remove women and unfolds in the household as well. Yeah, and that's something that needs to be corrected. But also, you do have a rise in Black women assuming leadership in Black churches, and you need more of that. And yes, too many of us have been infected by patriarchy and the idea that we should follow the man. And my rule is follow the truth. I don't care where it comes from, male or female, young or old, follow the truth. And the best Black families are those in which men and women have a say-so, and there's a respect of one for the other. Is the wailing room the same as the Terry room? James Smalls was, referring to the place where you have to visit the spirit, which the wailing bench, which is a place that you stay until the spirit is visiting. When I say you stay, it could be weeks, months, whatever. I'm not familiar with the Terry room. So you need to familiarize me with that. You might type something in on that. Michelle Jewell, the information you share about healing, is this where talismans or parchment come from? Yeah, there's this notion of shamans or whatever in different cultures, people who have the healing power. You find it in all cultures, but this is the source because these are the world's first people. And they are the first to identify God as a force, Ilani, an energy, and they communicate with that energy. And when I say that they're the authors of monotheism, it's not book, it's not religion. There's no word, as I pointed out in many shows before, there's no word for religion in any African language. There's a word for spirit, for praise, for prayer, but not religion, because African systems do not have prophets. They don't need a book, and they don't need commandments. And in fact, the strengths that I just referring to as character being the foundation of those strengths, in African cultures, that is expressed through human interaction, through the way humans treat each other. They don't have to be told to be kind. It's basic to human character. Robin Hughes, is there a complete book dedicated to the trois that we can obtain? I'll pull the one that I have in the back for one. It's called the trois our compass, trois of our compass. It's one. There's a body of work out there. The French have the most amount of work on this, but most of that is in French. And some of the stuff that's out there, there's a number of books on the trois, and some of them are seen through a white lens. Colin Turnbull, he has one on the forest people, but he gets a lot of things wrong. So if you look at the integration trap, I point out some of the things that is wrong with their view. So there are a number of different things. Let me go up and see if I can find any more questions here. Okay, we have something from Carnita Groves. Greetings from Ghana. I mentioned her before. Lynn Mosley, peace and blessings. He's from Chicago. Diane Little, Hotep. Carnita Groves, born and raised in Colorado. Repatriated to Ghana, 2014. Rana Lee Berman, how would the trois handle what is going on in this world today? That Rana Lee Berman is a former student of mine, and she made some comments on one of my sites. I tried to address that. And then we have something from Lao Tzu, our regular. Trinell Ladd, Ron Green, Ma'at Hotep family, Trinell Ladd, Stephen McKenzie, Hotep. See if we got any more here. Okay, let's see if there are any more questions here. One comment, absolutely fascinating. Trois people are very prosperous seed people throughout the world. Prosperous in that they've passed on great knowledge. They have been mistreated in the world today. They are living where they're away from a lot of oppressive people, including some Africans, they're doing well, or away from whites, they're doing well. But if they're in their presence, they have problems. Lao Tzu, over to Shaka, are you aware of any scholars or institutions that we have combating the drug pandemic we are facing? Yeah, there are, if by drugs, yeah, you're referring to the drugs that our people are dealing with. Yeah, I think that the Association of Black Psychologists, they have used African history and culture, and particularly African spirit traditions, to try and work some healing through this, and are also doing a lot of treatment around that. Okay, let me see if there's any more here. Sun Aura virus, any wonder why Trump was defeated by us? I guess I assume that's a funny statement, because we're smarter and we organized better, and lacking his resources, outflanked him, out-strategized him. And I think that the young leaders in Black Lives Matter, and there are many of them, deserve a lot of credit for that. See if there's any more here. Michelle Jewell, it's interesting that a group on YT called S.N.C.C have referred to the trois pygmies, yet the channel is African-based. Yeah, the trois hate that term. They refer to themselves as trois, or in BT. They have a number of different terms, but pygmy refers to stunted people, and it is generally referring to a concept, or shapes a concept of a people who are below the level of civilization. A comment here, wow, there was a cultural war on the plantation and we won. Oh yeah, you're alive. That's the proof that you won, but you're alive with your humanity intact. And you're alive with a culture with holes in it, with contradictions. This is the nature of oppression. So yeah, and in fact, we have a lot of victories, but we're forever redefining things or ignoring what's a victory, you know? We're not a defeated people. Okay. Okay, that's it. So I've enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. This is a lot of work, but I'm enjoying it. And I'm really enjoying the interaction. And I would hope that more people who tune in would raise questions. And also when you make, when you're looking at these DVDs, make comments after you watch them. I'd like to see your comments. And the key thing is subscribe to this program, because it's through subscriptions that things really grow. Encourage your friends to subscribe. So I'll see you next week.